Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal. We're sitting here Sunday morning, and I don't know when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, but at some point over the next couple months, the Florida Gators will be looking for a new head coach. Want to get into the conversation of one, what are we looking for in the next head coach for the Florida Gators? But I think more importantly, let's start talking about some candidates that would make a lot of sense to take over this Florida Gators program, a program that I will continue to bang the table for is one of the most attractive jobs that you can find across the country. You are in the state of Florida with elite talent surrounding you pretty much everywhere you go. You have some of the nicest facilities that you'll have in the country and pretty much endless resources. This is a program that, if handled the right way, is competing for SEC championships and national championships every single year. Billy Napier was clearly not the guy to maximize this program. Let's get into the conversation of how do we maximize this program and what head coach could be the guy to maximize this program. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Florida Gator fans, look, though, I think we're going to have a lot of these kind of conversations over the next couple of weeks and months. To the Florida fans, would love for you guys to let it fly in the comment section in terms of head coaches you would like to see Florida go after when it's time to go after a head coach. We'll talk about a lot of those coaches that you guys throw in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, look, I'll start this one out, and I'll kind of talk about the qualities that I'm looking for before we get into the candidates. And I think most importantly, I want a coach who's been there. Like you went kind of out on a limb and hired Billy Napier from Louisiana, who's never really been the head man at a program like Florida. Like, you are getting the keys to an absolute sports car. You got to be able to know how to use the sports car. You got to have been sitting in that seat at some point before. I think Billy Napier had a lot of good things that he wanted to do within this Florida Gators program, just didn't know how to do it because he's never been in that spot. And so, yeah, you're getting some conversations about a guy like Chadwell or a guy like Alex Golish who's doing really good stuff at USF. I think they're all really good football coaches. I would push back on those coaches because, again, even though they're good football coaches, it's a different ball game when you jump up from the group of five to not only the Power Five, but one of the biggest and most prolific programs that you see across the country. So the number one quality I'm looking for is a head coach that's been there before, has shown they can be successful doing it before. So I don't think group of five coaches on aggregate are probably the guy you're looking for. You got to be able to recruit. This is a program that should be top 8 at the very least every single year in the high school recruiting trail. And then more importantly, a coach that understands the new era of college football. Look, Dabo Swinney has won a lot, has shown he can operate a big program. Do I trust him to operate at the highest level in college football for the next 10 years? No, because he doesn't show like he's kind of adapting to the times. And so I think the best way to start this one off is Lane Kiffin. You talk about a coach that I think, one, is a very good football coach, specifically on the offensive side of the football, has showed that he can hire a staff around him that I think is a grade A staff, and then most importantly, knows how to operate in this new era of college football and's been there before, right? Tennessee, USC, now at Ole Miss. I think the first conversation you want to have is, would Lane Kiffin leave Ole Miss to go coach at Florida? One, we've seen Lane Kiffin do this. Like, he left Tennessee to go coach at USC, so we've seen him kind of make these – I wouldn't even know if I call it a lateral jump, because if you were to poll a lot of college football media analysts who know about this sport, or a lot of head coaches who've been around the sport, what's a better job? What's a job where you can have more sustained success? Still, the answer is Florida over Ole Miss. I know Ole Miss fans are going to kind of feed me in the comment section, but I think that's the case. I think Lane Kiffin should be target number one for this Florida Gators program.
And I think the big thing with Lane Kiffin is now you've seen him get a chance to take over an Ole Miss team that was kind of down and bring them, I think, pretty close to what they can possibly be. I mean, you look, I'm kind of with you. I think Ole Miss is a really, really good job. I think, like, if Glenn
100%.
Schumann from Georgia can get that job, he 100% should take it. I don't think it's Florida. I don't think it's Texas. I don't think it's Georgia. I don't think it's Alabama. Like, there's a tier, I think, that separates the top of the SEC from probably that Ole Miss job. And it's not giant, but again, if you're Lane Kiffin and you want to go like be one of the best coaches of all time, I think you probably do make that jump. And I think if you're Florida, you're pretty comfortable with what Lane can do. Cause I mean, there's probably things you don't love about how he has to operate at Ole Miss and how much he needs to use the transfer portal and how maybe he doesn't necessarily recruit the high schools at the extreme high end level. But I think when you get to Florida, I think you have much more opportunity to kind of do it a little bit different.
And you can do both. Like, you can go get the guys you want in the transfer portal, but you can also start bringing guys in at the high school ranks. And I think the conversation that Ole Miss fans might push back on and say, well, Lane Kiffin's having so much success at Ole Miss, why would he jump to a Florida program that seems to be floundering? Dill, this Ole Miss team I don't think is going to be that good in 2025. Like, I think Lane Kiffin has pushed his chips into the middle in terms of competing for an SEC championship and national championship in the 2024 season, because you look at that projected roster and what it's going to look like in 2025. I just don't think it's going to be an elite caliber roster. If you're Lane Kiffin, you can have that opportunity every single year at Florida because you can get it done on the high school recruiting trail. You can go get the pieces you want in the transfer portal.
And I think his quickness to kind of get that Ole Miss team really humming for the NIL era, I think is probably the one big thing that really
crushed it.
That it didn't take long for him.
By far the most attractive. Lane Kiffin is managing that falls on the head coach in terms of managing NIL, kind of getting all your ducks aligned within a program. Lane Kiffin's done an extraordinary job with that. And so Lane Kiffin has showed that this new era of college football with the transfer portal, with NIL, he knows how to navigate that at a high level. And I also think he's gone through some growing pains. Like, yeah, Lane Kiffin was a young, I would argue dumb at times, inexperienced head coach and made a lot of mistakes. He seems like he has learned from those mistakes and it really has kind of found his identity as the head coach of Ole Miss. If you take Lane Kiffin, transplant him in Florida, I just think that would make so much sense. Now,
and at the end of the day, he'll score a zillion points. I don't want to minimize his ability to coach on the field because this guy probably as good as it gets in terms of an offensive mind. Again, if he can hire a really good defensive coordinator, I think he's really in the driver's seat of being successful.
Which he's done. Like, I think he's done a really good job hiring around him at Ole Miss, which I love. I think that's a really important conversation that not enough people have. And then secondly, Dill, at Florida, playing defense is about getting athletes. Yeah, Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann, or Dan Lanning at Georgia, like, they were great defensive coaches. Didn't hurt that they had the better athletes on defense. And that's really what defense starts with. If you have elite caliber athletes, you're going to have good defenses. He'll have good athletes at Florida. And so I think Lane Kiffin would make the most sense. And Dill, I've seen on the message boards like the Urban Meyers. I've even seen Nick Saban. Look, I'd take Lane Kiffin over Urban Meyer. And I know that sounds absolutely crazy, and you might argue with me. The Urban Meyer hasn't showed me that he knows how to operate in this era of college football. He's been sitting behind a desk doing in front of a TV, in front of a microphone and camera. And so, like, Lane Kiffin has shown me that he can do it at the highest level in this era of college football. Okay, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I take Urban Meyer if he's willing to come out of retirement. That being said, I don't think it's that far away. Like, Lane Kiffin is an extremely attractive head coach. I would really like to see him at Florida. Let's go to number 2, and that's Jedd Fisch. This one was getting a lot of steam this offseason. I think there's a gap between Lane Kiffin and Jedd Fisch. Now, I would be excited if Jedd Fisch came to Florida. What he did at Arizona, I don't think there's many head coaches across the country that could have the success he had at Arizona over the last couple of years. Turned around a team that was 1-11, went 10-3 with them last year. Kind of a rocky start at Washington, but that was he's got some work to do at Washington. I think the conversations are, he just signed a contract with Washington. I'm not great with the numbers. Kiffin's number 1, but Jedd Fisch has a lot of qualities that you certainly like and think would work for this Florida Gators program.
And that's where I think you get into the conversation of, does Florida recruit itself, or how much does the head coach need to be the recruiter? Yep. And there's probably something in between. I don't know that you need to. Again, Florida's always going to have good players. I think just at the end of the day, assuming like you have a competent head coach, you're going to have a lot of good
Billy players. Napier was not a very competent head coach, still was able to recruit pretty damn well.
So you got Jedd Fisch, who I think, again, you haven't necessarily seen him be forced to recruit the way Georgia's assistants have to recruit, the way Alabama's assistants or even Florida's assistants have to recruit. But you've seen him do an unbelievable job at putting together a football team and then getting those guys to play really good football, especially on the offensive end. And again, very similar conversation to Lane Kiffin. If he can go get a big-time defensive coordinator, you know he's going to score points. He does a really good job developing quarterbacks at a really high level, putting an offensive game plan into action, making it work, even when he's overmatched with talent. So again, I think Jedd Fisch, there's certainly things you love about him. You love what he did at Arizona, but he'll have the same questions Kalen DeBoer essentially had. And obviously Kalen DeBoer has proven a lot of people wrong that you don't need to have necessarily proved that you can recruit. Again, Jedd Fisch is a good, really, really good coach. So I don't think you should have any issue recruiting at Florida.
All right, Dale, number 2. Number 3, but it probably should have been number 2.
That was my face when I made that at you, and I didn't see Coach Drink's name pop up. To me, Coach Drink is number one. What
Over
Coach Drink,
Kiffin. Over Kiffin?
I would take Coach Drink in a heartbeat. Not a heartbeat. I shouldn't have said that, but the way he's developed like a program in my mind, in
Yeah.
terms of like, I think Missouri's probably closer to Ole Miss than they are to Florida in terms of like where they are on this tier. Well, I probably shouldn't have. I think Ole Miss and Missouri are kind of similar, frankly.
You had me thinking that. I was like, wait.
No, that's probably not the right way to phrase it. But I think those are similar programs in my mind. I think they're not quite up with that Florida, Alabama, Georgia kind of tier. But you can obviously do well if you're a good coach at Mizzou. He's doing an unbelievable job. Again, similar conversation what we have with Coach Kiffin is he really did a good job embracing the NIL era quickly, getting things rolling. He's recruiting at as high of a level as I think you can at a place like Missouri with lack of in-state talent for that matter. But he also just does an unbelievable job developing guys. And that's where Billy Napier failed at the end of the day. I mean, he's gotten good talent into this building, but you look, they've made no improvements. They're the same team they were last year. They're not as physical. They don't look as fast. They just don't look as good, and guys aren't getting better. Drinkwitz gets his guys better every year.
Yeah, well, player development, he's probably the best player developer on this list, if we're being honest. The thing I would take is, I would take Lane Kiffin over Coach Drink because I think it's a better fit. Like, Coach Drink going to Florida is kind of a weird fit. He's a really good football coach, but kind of a weird fit. Coach Drink has created a more sustainable program than I think Lane Kiffin has. Look, again, I think Missouri, if Coach Drink is back there in 2025, is not going to be a bad football team. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be a bad football team next year if Lane Kiffin were still there, but they're certainly not going to be great. So you talk about creating a coach or getting a coach that can build a sustainable model to build a program. Like, Coach Drink has done that. Like, he is blending recruiting the high school ranks, using the transfer portal, relying on player development much better than any other coach on this list has. Like, Lane Kiffin, yes, the player development's been solid, the transfer portal's been solid, but how sustainable is that when you are grabbing so much of your roster from the transfer portal? Like, look, Coach Drink wants to use the transfer portal, does use the transfer portal, does it at a high level, but he is not relying on the transfer portal. He's recruiting, he's developing as well. That's what the ideal program looks like for Florida, where you're getting the bulk of your roster and talent from the high school ranks, supplementing with the transfer portal, but having elite player development. And Coach Drink has shown the ability to do that. Bill, you're right. I take back my list. It's Lane Kiffin 1, Coach Drink 2. I don't even know if I have Jedd Fisch 3, because if you can get Glenn Schumann to come down from Georgia, like, this is Dan Lanning 2.0. Now, I know I started off by saying I want a coach that's been there. If I'm not going to get a coach that's been there, I want a coach that's learned from the best. And that's Glenn Schumann, right? He's worked at 2 spots his whole coaching career. That's Alabama and Georgia, under the 2 best head coaches we've seen in the last 3 decades, Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. Very similar conversation to Dan Lanning. We don't know what he is as a head coach, but he has seen the 2 best head coaches operate. He's been the right-hand man to kind of Kirby Smart throughout his career. If there's a coach that I trust to not previously have been a head coach, but come in and implement really good practices of being a head coach and running a program, it would probably be Glenn Schumann from Georgia.
And I think there is one added benefit of getting some of these guys who aren't quite as old and maybe a little bit greener is you get a guy who I think comes in and is so hyper competitive and hyper focused on making things work. And I'm not saying Billy Napier wasn't, or that he was lazy or anything like that, but it didn't have the feel that I think when Kirby Smart sends his staff out to recruit, every battle's life and death, and there's hell to pay if you don't win it. And everything, like, even you watch that Kentucky-Georgia game, he was screaming at those offense. I mean, he's just like the competitive fire, I feel like, is so high there. And sometimes at times, Dan Mullen, Billy Napier, you didn't always feel like it was like life or death.
Docile. I feel like at points you'd have to wake Billy Napier up on the sideline.
And even Urban Meyer kind of said that. He's like, you need to be so maniacally crazy and focused. And like, okay, you watch the Swamp Kings documentary or anything about that Urban Meyer period. I mean, yeah, there was a little bit of chaos, but at the end of the day, Urban Meyer was so focused on winning, so competitive, and that fed into the team. And you saw how they played and how it was a little different than, frankly, how these Florida teams have played. So, again, Glenn Schumann obviously hasn't proved much, but I do think if you get a Glenn Schumann in there, you're going to get a guy who is unbelievably competitive, unbelievably fiery. And that's something I think you've been missing in Florida for a little bit.
Yeah, I agree, and I want now the question is, would Glenn Schumann take the job? I think Glenn Schumann was a target spot. You think Glenn Schumann would
Take the job at Florida?
there's been I was gonna say I agree. My question, at least from what I've read, is like people say that Glenn Schumann is very content being paid quite well as defensive coordinator, and then maybe taking over once Kirby Smart decides to move on. I'm kind of with you.
Wait
Like,
like 20 years.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know when Kirby Smart's gonna decide to hang up the headset. It doesn't seem like anytime soon. I think this would be wild, right? Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann coaching that against each other would be extremely exciting. All right, last one we got to talk about, Dill. Again, and one that I feel really pretty strongly about Kiffin, Coach Drink, and Schumann. And then Jedd Fisch and Chip Kelly, less so. I think I'd be excited about it, but I'm not, there's not the same excitement that I get in my stomach with these two. Chip Kelly's a really good football coach. Doesn't seem to want to do some of the things it takes to be a head coach in terms of recruiting, organizing NIL.
I don't know if that's totally fair because I think that stuff's really hard to do at UCLA.
I think that's more of it, right? Like, I think he just got fed up with like, hey, I am just outgunned here. I'm outgunned against USC and I'm outgunned against Oregon out on the West Coast. I want to move on. Dill, I promise you, Chip Kelly's not going to be the OC for Ohio State for long. Like, there's no way he's going to say he wants to be a head coach. I think he moved on to Ohio State because he knew this Ohio State offense is going to be great. It's a place where I can revitalize my career and get a landing spot where I think I can win at the highest level. Florida's a place you can win at the highest level. If Chip Kelly hires well around him, I think could be a coach that runs a really good program. Again, I think it starts with Lane Kiffin, Coach Drink, and Glenn Schumann. And we'll see. Florida's going to be the biggest job on the market. You know what I mean? Like, what Florida State, I don't know what they're going to do with Mike Norvell. The buy it's like $70 million, but they might just go like 3-9 this year. We'll see.
I think it's gonna be by far the biggest job because I don't even like Florida State, Florida. I still think Florida's a bigger job than Florida State, and I don't think Florida State job's hitting. So, yeah, I think this will be.
I can't think of another job that would be open. Like, some people are saying LSU and Brian Kelly, but I don't think they're going to get rid of Brian Kelly. All right, we'll see what Florida does. Again, I don't know when this is going to happen, but I feel like we all know it's going to happen. So we want to get ahead of the curve, talk about some coaches. It's going to be an exciting next couple months for the Florida Gators. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. Let it fly in the comment section about your coaches that you want to see for Florida. We'll talk to y'all later.